Hey guys, I'm here with an updated version of my old video, which if you haven't watched, don't even bother because this is the updated version. And thanks to everybody who suggested names for this new Gambit, I'll settle for Zombie King Gambit and I'll explain that later. So we start with e4, and if opponent goes e5, then we can bring our knight to f3, and here pawn to d6 is the second most played move. After that we can bring our bishop to c4, and here pawn to h6 is the most played move. So with this opening, black is saying that they just want to have a boring positional game, and we are not going to allow it with our next move, pawn to d4. So trying to open some lines. Most of the players will capture this pawn, and right after that we are going to offer the second pawn with pawn to c3. So we are kind of sacrificing two pawns in the Danish Gambit style, but this is like the Danish Gambit on steroids, because if they capture our pawn, which most usually they do, here we already have a really forceful and interesting way of getting a winning position. It all starts with the next move, and watch this, because something interesting is going to happen. We are going to sacrifice our bishop on f7, but after that, the black king just turns into a zombie and eats the brain of our bishop. Yeah, so that's what happens when you play this gambit. The king turns into a zombie, and it will take more feeding for us to win. So our next move is going to be knight to e5 check. This knight cannot be captured because of this spin, and now the king needs to be careful where he goes, because if he goes to any of these light squares, it is going to be a quick checkmate. So let's check this out. After king to e8, well, there is just queen to h5 check. They can block this, but that doesn't help them. After king to e7, this is checkmate. And if they go with king to e6, then we have this way, queen to d5 check. So they would go king to f6, then queen to f7 check. They have to eat our knight, and after that bishop to f4 check. So they capture the pawn, we capture with the knight, and it's a check. And after king to d3, you have a beautiful long castles with mate. Alright, let's go back. So after knight to e5 check, if they go to king to e7 right away, this is just a fork, and we are going to be up an exchange. So that's winning for white. The only kind of playable move, which will later turn out that it's not playable at all, is king to f6. So this is the move that the Stockfish recommends for black players. And after this, we are going to just feed the zombie more with queen to f3. And now they have no choice but to eat the brains of our knight. And after that, we are going to go queen to f7. So this is a very useful square for our queen, because it cuts off the king and it cannot go back. And also, fun fact is, there are only 3 moves that black can play which don't lead to a forced checkmate. How's that for a gambit? So they can only play knight to f6, queen to h4, or pawn to d5. And anything else they play will lead to a forced checkmate. Well, technically they can also play queen to g5, but that's a stupid move because just f4. Alright, well, what seems to be most of the players doing is bishop to e6, trying to develop with the tempo, which looks logical, but this is forced checkmate after queen to f4 check, king to d4, bishop to e3 check, king to c4, and then discovered check with pawn to e5, so king goes somewhere, let's say d5, and after that knight captures on c3 with check, king goes to c6, queen to a4 check, they block this, and that's checkmate. So I think it's useful to know this line because it seems like such a logical move, bishop to e6. But anyways, the only correct move in this position, which is by the way anyways losing, is knight to f6. So let's analyze that. So if they go knight to f6, in my latest video I was recommending not the strongest move in this position. Only after upgrading to Stockfish 15, the Stockfish realizes the most powerful move in this position, and that is pawn to f4 with check. So here the zombie king needs to make a choice. Does he fit on our pawn, or does he simply move away? So these are the only two legal moves in this position. If he grabs the pawn, we just want to castle. And look at this position. Our king is nicely safe at home, and the zombie king is out there stranded alone, waiting to be beaten by our pieces. This position is evaluated by Stockfish as +5 or +6 for white, and I'll just show you a fun line in this position that Stockfish recommends as one of the best continuations for black, and that is to go bishop to g4, and here we can go rook to d1. So just simply walking into the attack of this bishop. But also our point is that we are taking these squares away from the king, and actually if black does nothing, then queen to g6 and knight to c3 would be checkmate. So they kind of more or less have to capture this rook. But after that we have a forced mate in 8 moves. That would be with queen to e6 check, king goes to d4, bishop to e3 check, king goes further, king to d3. Then we go knight to a3, and with this move we are preparing this move, we are preparing to capture here, and also we are preparing to simply move this bishop away and then queen to e3 checkmate. So there are just too many threats for black to handle this. The Stockfish says the best is to go knight to e4. So after that we are going to capture this bishop with check. So the king has the last meal before his death. So he eats our bishop, then a rook to e1 check. He also eats this pawn, but that's like not so much. And after that rook captures knight with check, and we just force this king here into the side of the board and checkmate him like that. So this is what could happen if the king eats our pawn here right after we played pawn to f4, if he grabs this pawn. So the better continuation for black is if he moves the king to d4. After that we can capture this pawn on c3 with our knight. And here there are two moves that Stockfish recommends for black, and that's either pawn to d5 or king to c5. So let's first have a look at king to c5, the runaway method for the zombie king. Well, we can harass him with our bishop. King goes to c6, and here we have an interesting move, which is knight to b5. So it's hanging our knight, but it cannot really be captured, because if they capture knight, then pawn to a4 check, king goes to b4, then bishop to d2 check, king goes to c5, rook to c1 check, king goes to b6, and then queen to b3 with check, and then this is checkmate. So the knight is uneatable for the zombie king. But if they don't capture it, then there is a big problem, because if they just do nothing, let's say they push h5, we have a checkmate threat with knight to d4 check. So king goes to c5, and then rook to c1 check, king goes to b4, and then queen to b3 check, and then checkmate like this, similar checkmate. So what they kind of have to do is to push d4 in this position, I mean d5. So they block our queen from this diagonal. But even if they play this move, there are still so many problems after knight to d4 check. So if the king goes to the right, then simply pushing to e5 with check makes this position like +10 for white. But if they go to the left, then we simply win the queen with knight to e6 with check. So it's a discard check, and we will win the queen next turn. Well, what if they try to go for a queen exchange instead of the d5? So here they have an option to go queen to e7 and try to exchange queens. But this doesn't work for them because we have rook to c1 with check. This knight is still untakeable for them because of forced checkmate. So the king needs to go to d7, and after that we can capture on c7 with our rook and we will win the queen this way. So as you can see, running with the king to c5 didn't really help them. So let's see the other move, and that is pawn to d5. Well, here we have another interesting continuation, and it is bishop to e3, developing our bishop into the king's face with a check. So they can eat the brains of our bishop, but that's not a very good idea because simply long castling makes this position winning for white. Well, you just look at this position. The king is on the vacation in the white's territory, and these rooks are not very happy about it. Well, but feel free to analyze that yourselves at home. I will have a look at the other move, and that is king to c4. After that, we are still going to play long castle, and the stockfish recommends here as the strongest move bishop to c5. After that, we can capture the pawn on d5, and this comes with a really big threat, and that is to use this knight to force some discovery check, very nasty. So the only way how black can deal with this is actually to play queen to g8. But after that, our queen can capture on c7, threatening to capture this bishop. So the only thing to do is knight to c6 to block our queen, and then we can use these pawns to, make the king leave the bishop, so we can capture this bishop, and then, well, we are threatening some kind of pawn pushes with checkmate. So another only move is knight captures the knight. After that, the rook captures, and, well, just have a look at this position. It's totally winning for white, even though stockfishes is just like +3 maybe. I think the continuation goes like queen here, and then we can push the pawn, threatening to push again with checkmate. So they need to capture this pawn, and then this check wins the queen like this, and this is easily winning. All right, let's go back. There is one last thing that I want to talk about. So it's in this line. They didn't accept our bishop sacrifice. We long castled, and here the strongest move was bishop to c5. But from the human point of view, I think that some players might try to go for a queen's exchange in this position with queen to e7. But this move doesn't really work, and let me show you why. We can now go b3 check. Though we are hanging our knight, they cannot really capture it because that would lead to a painful long forced checkmate. So king to b4 is the move, but here we go rook to d4 check. If the king decides to go to either a5 or a3, that is simply a checkmate with rook to a4. And if the king captures the knight here, this is also forced checkmate, but we first need to capture the queen and fulfill the wish of our opponent to exchange the queens. Because after they recapture, we can go king to b1. With this move, we are preparing a square for our rook to deliver the checkmate, and they can delay this with bishop to a3, but after rook to d1, there is no stopping rook to d3 checkmate. So they are forced in this position to go up with their king, and here we have a rook to c4 double check, forcing the king to the only square, which is d6, and after bishop to c5 we will be picking up the queen next turn, and we will have a nice game after that. So guys, this is my short analysis of the new Zombie King Gambit. I hope you learned something, I hope you like this. Have fun, take care, and bye.